God told a man to murder his child. The man said yes. And we named that faith. Not hesitation. Not negotiation. Faith. The kind we still hold up as the gold standard, the thing we tell people to have more of. And nobody, almost nobody, stops to ask what kind of God makes that request in the first place. Here's what you were told: Abraham was tested. He passed. An angel stopped the knife at the last second. God provided a ram, and everyone lived happily, Isaac included. Clean story. Comfortable. But here's what they don't mention. Isaac never speaks to his father again. Not once. After the mountain, after the knife, after whatever happened up there in the silence between a father's raised arm and his son's bound hands, Isaac disappears from the narrative. Abraham speaks. Sarah speaks. But Isaac? Gone. Quiet. Like someone who decided the less said, the better. And that's where it gets strange. Because the text doesn't hide this. It just doesn't explain it. Genesis 22 ends and the very next thing we hear is Abraham receiving a genealogy report. Not an embrace. Not a conversation. A list of names. As if the writer needed to move past that mountain as fast as possible. Read that again. Because most people skip right past it. A father nearly slaughters his son on divine instruction, and the aftermath is silence. Not relief. Silence. The kind that only happens when something was broken so completely there are no words left to cover it. Which makes no sense, unless the story we've been telling about Moriah isn't the whole story. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the story, the beginning of the problem. Abraham is old. Impossibly old by the time Isaac is born. Genesis tells us he was 100 years old and Sarah was 90. Isaac is the child of a miracle. The promised heir. The reason Abraham left everything he knew, crossed desert and wilderness, built altars and waited decades. Isaac is the proof. The whole covenant hangs on him. No Isaac. No descendants like stars, no promised land, no nation. Nothing. So here's the question nobody asks. If God already knew Abraham was faithful, if God is by definition all-knowing, why did the test need to happen at all? You'll hear people say God doesn't test for his own benefit. He tests for yours. To reveal something to you about yourself. Fine. But what exactly was being revealed here? That Abraham would kill his son if told to? What is that a revelation of? Because from where I'm standing, that's not a portrait of faith. That's a portrait of total surrender to authority, which can look like devotion, or it can look like something much darker, depending on who's holding the knife. Who benefited from this outcome? Think about that seriously for a second. Not spiritually, mechanically. Who needed to know that Abraham would go all the way? There's a detail in Genesis 22 that doesn't get nearly enough attention. When Abraham and Isaac set out for the mountain, 2 servants come with them. Abraham tells those servants to wait at the base of the mountain. He says, and this is the verse, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go up there and worship, and then we'll come back to you." We'll come back. Plural. Both of us. Now you can read that as Abraham's faith, that God would provide, that somehow it would all work out. That's the Sunday school answer. But consider the other possibility. Abraham knew he was going to do it. And he lied. To the servants. Maybe to Isaac. Maybe even to himself. And that's where it gets darker. Because 3 days before reaching Moriah, the text says 3 days, Abraham saw the place from a distance. 3 days of walking with his son toward that mountain. 3 days of knowing what waited at the top. 3 days of conversation, of campfires, of looking at the boy God told him to burn. What do you say? What do you talk about? Does Abraham tell him stories? Does he go quiet? Does he look at Isaac the way you look at something you're about to lose forever? The text gives you nothing. 3 days. And silence. Then there's the moment on the mountain itself. Isaac carries the wood. The text specifically notes this, Isaac carrying the wood for his own sacrifice, and he asks his father the question that should break every reader who's paying attention. Father, we have the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham says, God will provide the lamb, my son. And they walk on together. That sentence, they walked on together, is one of the most devastating lines in the Hebrew Bible. Because Isaac is still asking questions. He doesn't know. And Abraham is walking forward, without stopping, without turning around, without choosing the third option, which is simply, no. I'm not saying Abraham didn't love his son. I'm just saying, if you wanted to build a portrait of a man who has completely surrendered his own moral judgment to an external authority, this is exactly what it would look like. And here's the door that opens. If that's faith, what does that make the things done in faith's name since? Here's the detail most people have never heard. And once you hear it, it reframes everything. The location matters. God didn't just say go sacrifice your son. He said go to the land of Moriah, to a specific mountain he would show Abraham. Moriah. Remember that name. Centuries later, King Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem. On a specific site. The site chosen for the temple, according to 2 Chronicles 3 verse 1, is Mount Moriah. The same mountain. Let that sit. The place where a father prepared to kill his son on God's command is the exact same location where Israel would later build its most sacred structure. The holiest site in Judaism. The place where prayers go. Where the presence of God was said to dwell between the cherubim. Where sacrifices were offered by the thousands. And not just Judaism. That same ground, the Temple Mount, is now one of the most contested pieces of real estate on earth. 3 major religions. Centuries of war. Billions of people. All orbiting the same mountain where, if you believe the text, a man once laid his son on an altar and raised a knife. Why that spot? Of all the mountains and all the land, why there? Was it a consecration? Was something claimed on that ground that day that never fully released? Or is it something simpler and stranger, that the place where the most extreme act of surrender happened became the place where humanity kept returning to kneel? I don't have a clean answer to that. No one does. But it doesn't feel like coincidence. And in 3,000 years of reading this story, almost no one asks it out loud. Now here's where it gets into territory most people don't want to enter. The text of Genesis 22 uses a specific Hebrew word when it describes what God asked Abraham to do. The word is Olah. A burnt offering. Total. Complete. Nothing left. This isn't a standard sacrifice where part of the animal is returned or eaten. An Olah goes entirely to God. Every piece. Consume. God didn't ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac in some vague symbolic sense. He asked for an Olah. The complete destruction of the thing offered. And the question biblical scholars almost never ask in popular settings is, this practice, child sacrifice, specifically firstborn child sacrifice, was not unknown in the ancient Near East. It existed. It was practiced by neighboring cultures around Israel. The Canaanites, the Phoenicians. Archaeological evidence has confirmed it at sites like Carthage and Tophet. The official position is that the Moriah story was meant to end that practice. That God was saying, I will provide. You don't have to do this. The ram in the thicket is the message. Substitution replaces human sacrifice. But here's what they don't mention. The command came first. God initiated this. God said take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him as a burnt offering. The substitution was late. It came after Abraham had already made the choice, already built the altar, already bound his son, already raised the knife. Which makes no sense unless the point was never the ram, unless the point was the moment of total, irreversible surrender. The moment where Abraham had already, in his own heart and will, killed his son. The ram was a mercy. But the surrender had already happened. And God, or the text, needed that surrender to be complete before it offered a way out. What kind of God needs that? What is that a portrait of? And before you answer with theology, sit with it first. Sit with a father on a mountain with a knife. Sit with a boy who trusted him. Sit with 3 days of silence. Because this is the story at the center of 3 world religions. Hundreds of millions of people. And we call it the beginning of faith. There is one more thing. Buried so quietly in the text that most translations glide right past it. After everything, after the ram, after the angel, after the promise is repeated, the text says Abraham returned to his servants. He and his servants rose and went together to Beersheba. Abraham and his servants. Not Abraham and Isaac. Not Abraham and his son. Abraham and his servants. Together. Isaac is not mentioned. Isaac does not come down the mountain with his father in the text. He simply disappears. And the next time we see Isaac in Genesis 24, he is a grown man in a field, and Abraham is sending a servant to find him a wife. From a distance. As if they no longer share a house. As if something happened on that mountain that made living together impossible. The rabbis notice this. Some say Isaac went to study. Some say he needed time. Some say, and this is a minority tradition but it exists, that Isaac was, in some spiritual sense, never fully the same after Moriah. That something in him was permanently altered by what he had seen his father prepared to do. One tradition, found in early Jewish mystical literature, goes further. It suggests Isaac did die on the mountain, spiritually or in some accounts literally, and was resurrected. That the ram was not a substitution but a cover story. That what happened at the top of Moriah was not a near miss but a completion, and everything after is aftermath. I'm not telling you that's true. I'm telling you that's in the tradition. In the margins of the same sacred text. Written by people who read this story and couldn't make it end cleanly either. So what do we do with Abraham? Do we call him faithful? We do. We have. For 3,000 years. And maybe that's right. Maybe surrender to the incomprehensible is exactly what faith requires, and the discomfort you're feeling right now is just what real faith looks like from the outside. Or maybe, and this is the door I'll leave open, the one you'll carry with you after this video ends, maybe we've been reading the wrong character as the hero. Maybe the story isn't about Abraham's willingness to obey. Maybe it's about Isaac's silence. The silence of someone who was carried somewhere against his will, who had no choice, who trusted and was brought to the edge of annihilation, and who never, in the entire text, said a single word of blame. Not to his father. Not to God. Not to anyone. There are no Psalms of Isaac. No Book of Isaac. No recording of what he thought, felt, believed, or feared after that mountain. He becomes a husband, a father, a patriarch, and none of it says how. How does a man love after that? How does he pray? How does he close his eyes at night and not see fire? The record ends there. Not with an answer. With a name, Moriah, and the silence of a boy who came down the mountain changed in ways the text refused to describe. We call the story about faith, but I think it might be about something older than faith. About the things that happen between fathers and sons that never get written down. The things that shape the whole of a civilization without ever being named. If you want to keep pulling this thread, you know what to do. Because we haven't even touched what Isaac passed to his sons. And what his sons did to each other. That's a whole other mountain.